At 43, Jamie Dornan did something no one had ever really seen him do before. He lost control, even if only for a moment. Not in a dramatic, headline-chasing way, but in a quiet, deeply human way that made it impossible to look away. And what made it even more unsettling was the realization that whatever surfaced in that moment had been buried for years, carefully hidden behind the calm, controlled image he had built his entire career on. It happened during what should have been just another routine appearance. The setting was familiar, the questions predictable, and Jamie, as always, appeared composed and in control. But then something shifted, subtly at first, almost unnoticeable, until it wasn't. A question touched on something personal, something that didn't have a rehearsed answer, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't immediately respond. There was a pause, longer than usual. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for those watching closely to sense that something wasn't right. It wasn't discomfort in the typical sense, it felt deeper, like he had suddenly stepped into a space he had spent years avoiding. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Jamie has always been known for his ability to remain grounded, even under intense scrutiny. Through global fame, criticism, and constant media attention, he maintained a level of emotional control that made him seem almost untouchable. That's why this moment felt so different, because for once, that control slipped, revealing something far more vulnerable beneath the surface. He didn't immediately reveal everything. In fact, what made the moment so powerful was how little he actually said. He spoke in fragments, in carefully chosen words that hinted at something much larger without fully explaining it. He referred to carrying things for a long time, and the way he said it made it clear that this wasn't about a single event, it was something that had been building quietly over the years. Fans quickly began connecting this moment to things they had noticed before but never fully understood. The way he sometimes deflected personal questions, the subtle tension in certain interviews, the occasional distance in his tone when conversations became too close to something real. All of it suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle that no one had realized they were looking at. As he continued speaking, there was a moment where his composure nearly broke completely. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. His voice faltered, his gaze shifted, and for a brief second, it felt like he might stop altogether. That hesitation, that almost collapse, was enough to make the entire room feel different. What he hinted at next only deepened the mystery. He spoke about pressure, not the obvious kind that comes with fame, but something more internal, something harder to explain. The kind of pressure that doesn't come from expectations alone, but from trying to hold everything together while making it look effortless. There was no mention of scandal, no shocking revelation in the traditional sense. Instead, it felt like he was opening the door just enough to let people see that behind the success, behind the roles, there was a version of himself that had been quietly struggling with something he had never fully shared. And that realization hit harder than any dramatic confession could have. The most haunting part of the moment was what he didn't say. The gaps in his words, the pauses, the way he seemed to pull himself back just as he was about to go further. It created a sense that whatever he was holding onto was still there, still unresolved, still something he wasn't ready to fully release. By the time the clip began circulating online, it had already taken on a life of its own. People weren't just reacting to what Jamie said, they were reacting to how it felt. The vulnerability, the hesitation, the sense that they had witnessed something real and unfiltered in a world that rarely allows for that. And that's what made it so powerful. Not the idea that he revealed a shocking secret, but the feeling that for the first time, he allowed that secret to be seen, even if only in fragments. Leaving everyone with the same question echoing in their minds: what exactly had Jamie Dornan been carrying all these years? As people began replaying that moment again and again, the question slowly shifted from what happened to something far more revealing: why did it happen now? Because emotional breakdowns like that don't appear out of nowhere. They are usually the result of something much deeper, something that has been building quietly over time, often hidden behind years of control, discipline, and silence. When you look at Jamie Dornan's journey, the pieces start to form a clearer picture. From the outside, his career has followed a path many would envy: global fame, successful films, and a reputation for professionalism. But behind that trajectory is a reality that isn't often discussed: the pressure of being constantly defined by a single role, the weight of expectations, and the challenge of maintaining a personal identity while the world projects its own version of who you are. That kind of pressure doesn't always explode in obvious ways. Sometimes, it settles in, becoming something quieter but more persistent. The need to stay composed, to give the right answers, to avoid revealing too much, it creates a pattern of holding back. And over time, that restraint can turn into something heavier than it seems on the surface. What Jamie hinted at in that moment didn't sound like a single secret tied to one event. It felt more like an accumulation, years of internalizing things he chose not to share. The expectations of the industry, the responsibility of protecting his family from public scrutiny, and the constant balancing act between his personal life and professional demands. None of these are dramatic on their own, but together, they create a kind of pressure that doesn't easily release. There's also the element of perception, which plays a significant role in how someone experiences that pressure. For years, Jamie has been seen as calm, controlled, and emotionally steady. That image, while accurate in many ways, can also become a limitation. When people expect you to always be composed, there's less space to show vulnerability, even when it exists. And that's what makes that moment so significant. It wasn't just about emotion, it was about breaking a pattern. For the first time, even briefly, he stepped outside of that expectation. Not by fully explaining everything, but by allowing the emotion itself to be visible. And sometimes, that visibility says more than any explanation ever could. Another important factor is timing. At 43, people often reach a point where reflection becomes unavoidable. The past, the choices made, the things left unsaid, they don't disappear, they accumulate. And sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected moment for all of that to surface, not in a controlled way, but in a way that feels real and unfiltered. What makes this even more powerful is that Jamie didn't try to turn it into a narrative afterward. He didn't clarify, didn't elaborate, didn't attempt to reshape how people interpreted it. That silence, once again, became part of the story, but this time, it felt different. It didn't feel like avoidance, it felt like acceptance. As if what needed to be shown had already been shown. By the end of it all, the secret people were searching for starts to feel less like something specific and more like something universal. Not a hidden scandal or a shocking revelation, but the quiet reality of carrying more than you let the world see. The kind of weight that doesn't have a clear name, but is felt nonetheless. And maybe that's the truth behind it. Not that Jamie Dornan was hiding one big secret, but that he had been holding on to many small, unspoken things for years. And in that one moment, they finally became visible, not fully explained, not completely understood, but undeniably real. By the end of it all, the secret people were searching for starts to feel less like something specific and more like something universal. Not a hidden scandal or a shocking revelation, but the quiet reality of carrying more than you let the world see. The kind of weight that doesn't have a clear name, but is felt nonetheless. And maybe that's the truth behind it. Not that Jamie Dornan was hiding one big secret, but that he had been holding on to many small, unspoken things for years. And in that one moment, they finally became visible, not fully explained, not completely understood, but undeniably real. By the end of it all, the secret people were searching for starts to feel less like something specific and more like something universal. Not a hidden scandal or a shocking revelation, but the quiet reality of carrying more than you let the world see. The kind of weight that doesn't have a clear name, but is felt nonetheless.